Hey girl, my name is Anel. Welcome to the Brave and Her podcast, where we inspire, empower, and motivate by sharing our stories of bravery. I strongly believe that by sharing our stories, we open ourselves to healing, but also serve to give hope and inspiration to those who are dealing with a tough situation. We will talk about all topics under the sun. Now let's hear your stories of bravery. Hey girl, thank you for being here in today's episode. I have Jodi Rosser. She's a mom of two boys. Both of them are teenagers. One's in a sophomore in high school and a sophomore in college. And she's the author of Depth. That one's a little hard for me to pronounce. And podcast host of also podcast called Depth. And she's here to talk to us about just her journey through some very painful situations that she went through in her life, and the reason why she wrote this book. So, but anyway, I'll let Jodi introduce herself, and we'll talk more about her journey.
Thanks, Anel, for having me on your podcast. You know what? It's so exciting. I met you at a MOP speaking event just maybe a couple months ago, and it was such a joy. And yes, I'm sorry, the word depth is hard to say. I always say it looks like deeper roots, right? So see, people don't think we're saying the word depth.
I like that.
So depth with a PTH at the end. And I love that God has taken this illustration of a tree with deep roots and really has it resonated so deeply in my life. And it started by me walking through some of my greatest heartbreaks. And I think when we walk through that, sometimes our greatest heartbreaks can catapult us to our greatest growth. And that's what happened in my life. I never set out to write a book or have a podcast. I'm a science teacher, actually. I work in a STEM lab here in the area I live at an elementary school, and I love what I do. But along the way, I walked through 3 great heartbreaks. I know we're going to dive deeper into that in just a minute. And that kind of just sparked this way of God saying, hey, let's not waste the pain. And so I started a blog, and then that turned into later a podcast, which later became a book. And so that's a little of my journey, but I'll share more as we get through the questions. But yeah, I definitely have a heart for helping other people walking through difficult times. And I like to help them have perspective that maybe this difficult time in their life will be their greatest catalyst for growth in their life as well.
Yeah, I love that, because I think we all go through hard situations, and I think what we do with that is what really I don't want to say really matters, but what really would be kind of like your future, right? Like what's gonna happen after. Do we take it in a way that's a learning situation, or do we take it as we play the victim? But
yeah, I agree with that. You know what? There's a quote. I just want to share this real quick by John Ortberg. And it says, if you ask someone when they walked away from their faith, the answer will be suffering. But if you ask someone when they grew deepest in their faith, the answer will be suffering. So suffering is just the catalyst. What is it going to do? And I think you're right. It's a defining moment in your life. When you have these heartbreaks, when you have this pain, what are you going to do with it? Do you run to God, or do you run away? And sadly, many people walk away from their faith because they don't understand why God would have them walk through something hard. And definitely it's not easy. And I'm not saying it's roses and, rainbows, but I do believe that when we do seek God and when we invite him into the pain, he shows up, and the intimacy and the depth and the growing deep roots in your faith will be astounding as you run to him in your pain. And that doesn't mean you run to him not angry. You can run with your doubts and your anger. He handles all of that. He can handle it all. But the key is to not turn your back on him.
Yeah, someone once told me, because I've had those moments where I'm angry at God, but someone once told me that God's he's a big boy. He can take your true feelings, and just
I agree with that.
Him with that. So let's start with talking about in your book you mentioned 3 major heartbreaks that you've experienced through your whole life, which is what you you used to write this book. So can you tell us a little bit more about those heartbreaks?
Yes, I would love to. Well, originally when I had this idea for the book, or I should say when God placed the idea in my heart, I thought it was just going to be on my divorce. In 2014, I went through a heartbreaking divorce, and I thought that was going to be the main part of the book. And as I was writing the book proposal, God said, there's two other heartbreaks that need to go in that book. And back in 2006, I had a miscarriage in between my two boys. And it was 16 weeks along in the pregnancy. So I was in my second trimester, and it just rocked my world. I think that was the very first time in my life where life did not go as I hoped or planned. I think we have this kind of idea of how our life's going to be and this plan. And it was the first time like I felt like my whole world had just turned upside down. And so that was many years ago, but that was my first heartbreak. And then after my divorce, sadly, one of my dear friends, I actually met her when our kids were 2, our oldest were 2, and now our oldest are 19. So it was many years ago that I met her, and she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And 4 months later, she passed away. And that was another heartbreak that just rocked my world. And that was about 2 years after my divorce. So I take those 3 heartbreaks and I share about them in the book, and I just give a little glimpse of each part of the story for each chapter. But it was interesting because I remember when I got this idea from God to add the 2 other heartbreaks, it's like, well, how do you write a book with 3 storylines? Like I remember saying, God, I don't know what to do. Like I thought it was just gonna be on the divorce. So how do you do it? And I remember praying fervently for him to give me wisdom. And what happened is he dropped this acrostic into my head called strength. And that's another thing I know we're going to talk about in just a minute, but this is the way I divide up the book. And so under each of the letters in the acrostic, I share a little bit of each storyline.
Oh, I love that. What made you want to share such personal experiences in this book?
Yeah, you know what? I don't think I actually would say I'd wanted to, but I felt like God was asking me to. You know, it's interesting, right? When everything happened after the divorce, I was just reading so many books, Anel. Like you can see behind me on my bookcase, I just dove deep into reading. And I realized that reading was a huge part of my healing. But what I didn't know, it was also part of my growing. My roots were growing deeper every time I was reading these books. And so I just remember in 2014, like October, just God placed it on my heart, like share what you're learning in the midst of your pain. And I just started a blog, and I would write very not regularly. It was kind of like randomly here and there. I would just share something I had learned. It could have been something from a book, maybe something I had listened to, a sermon. And it just started very much just me kind of trying to help others. Like, this is what God taught me. Maybe this would help you. And that's where it started. And then I started doing regular book recommendations because I was just reading so much, and people were really liking to hear what books I recommended. And then that turned into later a more regular blog where I was starting to write weekly. And then a podcast appeared. It shouldn't appear, but God gave me this idea of a podcast. And what was so great is it was like, well, what am I going to talk about on the podcast? And it's like, all the books you've read. And so I started to have the authors of the books that I had been part of my trajectory, the part of my journey, had them on the podcast and sharing how their book had touched my heart. And then that helping other people maybe hear how that book could help them. And so it really was from a place of helping others. No one wants to get on and say, hey, I walked through a divorce. I was actually super embarrassed to admit that for many, many months after I knew that was going to be happening with our family. And you know, vulnerability. I'm very vulnerable in the book, but I know how much to share and not to overshare. I think there's a balance because I think sometimes people can get on and share too much. So I think I share a lot about my own trajectory, my own story, my own struggles, but that's really where I draw the line and share about my own stuff. Yeah. So again, just to help others.
Yeah. And I think that's great because, you know, where people can relate is really where you're the most vulnerable, I think, because not a lot of people are willing to talk about it. And when they see someone else that, you know, like you sharing these very vulnerable situations, they can definitely relate, either by the divorce or a loss of someone or a miscarriage. I was actually just interviewing someone yesterday for the podcast, and she went through so many years of infertility and many few miscarriages. So by, you know, you and her sharing your stories, you're helping other women with that, and it just takes bravery to share such vulnerable situations and such heartbreak. So painful. But
yeah,
I think, in my opinion, like I think by us sharing our stories, like we heal, but we also help others.
I agree with that. The actual last part of my acrostic, the E, or I'm sorry, not the E, the H, is honestly share your story and help another hurting heart. And I think that's where it comes full circle when we can say, this is what we went through. This is how God showed up. This is how he was faithful. then that comes alongside and helps someone else, but then it also brings healing to you. And I think that no one relates to us in our successes. They relate to us in our struggles. And that's how connection and vulnerability happens. It breeds this beautiful gift of connection.
Right. Um, so okay, have you questioned how different life would be if during any of your major heartbreaks you had chosen to run away from God instead of running to God and in faith?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know what? It's funny because I feel like grief, you're already feeling very alone when you walk through grief. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had ran away from God, I would just be lonely. Like I think I would just be dealing with all of this by myself. And you're already feeling alone. So that it would just make me feel even more alone. And I'm just grateful that that's not the path I chose. I think there's a lot of people out there hurting alone. And I want to say to them, don't do grief alone. There are so many people that want to help you. There's support groups, there's
Yeah.
counselors, there are things at churches for you that can come and talk grief groups. And actually, a lot of them are specific to certain types of grief. I know when I walked through my miscarriage, we attended a group called Empty Arms, and that was the name of the support group. And it was for people who had lost a baby either through miscarriage or stillbirth. And so that was such a place to feel like I wasn't alone. And yes, it was at a church, so it was had the faith base, which I love because I wanted to run to God in my pain. But there are lots of places. So I would say I would think that you would be really lost and feeling alone in your pain, and I don't think that's a healthy place to be. So I
Yeah.
think definitely I'm grateful that I ran to God with the broken pieces, and He has taken those broken pieces. I love to talk about a clay pot because I think all of us have something that breaks us, whether it's something in our marriage, something with our kids, something with a loved one, a family member. Like you said, a lot of people lose loved ones. It may not be cancer, it could be a heart attack, it could be a car accident. I mean, suicide. There are so many heartbreaks. And when we have these broken pieces, what do we do with them? We can sit with them by ourselves, but what if we just placed him at the foot of Jesus and said, I don't know what you can do with this. I don't know how you're going to be able to use this, but I'm willing to run to you and say, I don't want my pain to be wasted. Somehow take it and use it. And then he takes these broken pieces of our lives and puts them back together in the most beautiful clay pot. I actually took a clay pot and broke it on purpose, put it back together, and the light that shines through it, through the brokenness, is beautiful. And if you had a perfectly clay pot with no brokenness, the light's not going to shine out. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think that's what God wants us to take our broken stories and help others. But it all starts with going to Him first. He has to heal you first. You can't help someone else until you've gone a little bit farther in your journey. So I think I'd be super unhealthy, lonely, lost. Oh my goodness, I don't know where I'd be in now, but I wouldn't be where I want to be.
And it goes back to that defining moment of what are you going to do with this pain, right? Are you going to live, with being angry, lonely, or sad, or, the negative feelings, which I'm not saying they're not normal and they're not okay. Of course, they're okay, they're normal feelings, but are you going to be just sitting on those and not take, like the positive way, like learning from whatever you went through, sharing your story, having faith in God that, you know, this happened for a reason or for a purpose or to help someone. Um, I think it just goes back to that defining moment. And I'm glad that you decided to do the positive and, have faith in God and share your story and just share that you can grow and through pain.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I do think it's important to feel all those feelings, though. That's actually when we get to the acrostic, I'll share that. But it's just don't get stuck in them. I think that's the difference. I think you got to let yourself cry. You got to let yourself feel angry. You got to let yourself feel sad. You got to let yourself feel those emotions have to move through you. But so what happens is some people get stuck in those emotions and they either don't want to deal with them and they find ways to numb out, and that could be in a whole bunch of ways, alcohol or binge watch television, or, there's so many ways, or they don't know how to get past them and they get stuck in the bitterness of them. So it's okay to feel them. It's actually healthy to feel them. It's just not to get stuck there. You got to move through them. And that is really great when you can meet with a counselor and they can help you through that.
Yeah. Or thinking that, by you showing any of the negative emotions that you're I don't know, a failure or
Right.
vulnerable or weak or, any of the negative stuff. And actually, it just makes you stronger.
I agree. Yeah, you got to let yourself feel all of them, the hard emotions. And that's where a lot of people don't want to experience the pain because I journaled a lot. I would just get all my emotions out. And it's hard. It's not fun. Lots of tears, but that's how you heal from it. You don't want to get stuck in that place where you never went through the pain.
Yeah. So talking about strength, you mentioned it a bit ago, the acronym for the word strength, and you mentioned it, and can you tell us more about what strength means?
Yeah. Okay. So this is still such an exciting story in my life when God dropped this acrostic into my head, this acronym for strength. I was on a bus ride for my son's field trip, and it was the craziest thing. I thought I would be gib gabbing with my friend the whole time.
Mm.
And we kind of got separated on the bus. She was by the teacher. I met by this woman I didn't know. And I talked to her for a minute or two, and there just wasn't a huge connection. So now I'm sitting on this hour bus ride, no book, nothing. And it's like quiet. And so I just think when we're still and when we don't have noise and we just sit quietly before the Lord, He speaks to us. And in that moment in time on the bus, He dropped this acrostic for strength. And this is what I had been praying for the last 3 months for the book. I was like, God, how do you write a story with 3 storylines? So this is what He dropped into my head. I still will never forget it. It's one of those moments in time in my faith that's like a marked moment where I just was in awe of God. So the S is seek God and invite Him into your pain. And this sounds like it's a lot, but it's just a simple crying out to God. It's like we were just saying, instead of running away and turning your back, it's just saying, God, here's my broken pieces. I don't want them to be wasted. Help me. It could even be give me strength for today. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It's just crying out to Him and saying, I invite you to walk through this pain with me. I don't want to do it alone. I want you to bring purpose to it. I don't know how that's going to look, but I'm going to seek you. And that means you're in your Bible, you're reading Christian books that are going to encourage you to get into some of these Bible verses that are going to build you up. And so that's the first one, S. And then the T is tearfully allow yourself time to grieve and process the emotions. And what I want to say about this acrostic, this isn't like one check, two check, like you're kind of doing all of this at the same time. And it could take years. I mean, this was something that was many, many months of counseling for processing the emotion, years in counseling, to be honest. And again, it's the feelings. You can't heal unless you feel, and no one wants to feel the hard feelings because it's hard. But again, don't numb out, and don't ignore them. Don't go work extra hard at your job and try to pretend it didn't happen. It happened, so you got to deal with it. And that's the part. And I give a lot of really practical things that I did in that part of the book. So I hope that will really help someone. R is replace your finite view with God's infinite perspective. I think that a lot of times when we're walking through grief, we can see just a small piece of the puzzle, but God sees the entire puzzle. And so a lot of times we have questions like why, and I don't understand. And you might not understand for many years. And maybe this side of heaven, you'll never understand. But there is a purpose behind everything God has us walk through. And sometimes it's so you could come alongside and help someone else. Who would have thought I'd have a book and a podcast? Like maybe that was for me, my perspective. I didn't know at the time. Like if I actually remember now, if someone would have said, at that moment in time, did you know in 5 years or in 7 years, I'd be like, what? You're crazy. I'm not that's not God is not having me going to write a book, but I had no idea that He was going to use it. And so I like to just talk about, we don't know what God's doing. And I shared this with you and now at the MOPS event that I went to about Paul. And I feel like this is such a beautiful story. Paul's in the Bible. I like to put myself in the person's shoes, kind of how are they feeling? And he ends up in prison and he's got this amazing speaking, I want to say career. That's not the right word. Ministry, I guess I should say. Speaking ministry. And he's winning hearts over for Jesus. And then all of a sudden he's in prison. And I bet you he felt sidelined. Like, God, why do you have me here? I don't understand. But here's the thing. If he focused on that one little thing and just got grumpy and God, I don't know why you have me here. I'm not even going to have you use me anymore. I'm just going to sit here and, stew, which he could have done, right? But instead he's like, okay, God, I guess I'll write letters to the churches and encourage them that way, right? And little did he know that those letters were going to become the most impactful part of his ministry. They're going to be letters in the Bible. And I know maybe our letters aren't going to become Bible books, right? But you know what? We don't know what God can use with whatever we do. Maybe your conversation with someone else is going to take them on their trajectory. And so I just think sometimes we need to take our finite view and say, God, I don't understand, but help me see it from your perspective. Open my eyes to see what you're doing. And it's not an easy thing. It's an act of maturity to ask God for His perspective in the middle of it. But I tell you, He's going to show up big. And it's so amazing. That verse, Ephesians 3:20, where He does immeasurably more. I like to call it my in awe of God moments. I'm telling you, there's just one after another. And it's like, I just sit there and I'm in awe. And I just think sometimes we have to replace what we think our lives are going to look like with maybe God's got a different perspective that we can see, and he's going to use it in ways we didn't know. And so that's my R. And my E is embrace God's character development in the midst of the chaos. Oh, no one likes to have to grow in their faith or grow in their character development, right? I have a chapter called Embrace the Chisel. No one wants to be chiseled. No one wants to have our lives refined. But guess what? We all need to be chiseled at times. We need to be pruned. We need to be refined. We need to grow. And the way we grow, the catalyst is not happy moments in our life. It's hard times. That's when God comes in and says, hey, I want you to be more patient. Hey, I want you to be more empathetic. Hey, I want you to have more compassion. Those happen in those moments. And so I think that's a really important one. Maybe he's growing you. Maybe it's just all about you growing your roots deeper. Maybe there isn't another whole ministry you're going to start. That's not always everyone's path, but maybe it's just you becoming more self-aware and more deeper in your faith. The N is never lose sight of God's grace. You know what? Lots of heartbreaks have shame attached to them. Not all of them, but some. Divorce is one of those where there is this shame of like, I have a failed marriage and this isn't what God planned for my life and my marriage. And so I have a whole section of the book on God's grace. And there's a chapter on forgiveness. There's a chapter on just, you know what? God doesn't want you living shackled in shame. He wants you to be free. And so letting go of those thoughts in your mind that God can't use it. He can use any of your heartbreaks when you place it at his feet. He doesn't waste anything. So don't believe the lie. Satan's going to want to get in there and say, oh, God can't use you now. Look what you did. You have this addiction or you walk through this, whatever it is. That is a lie. Satan just wants you to stay stuck. Don't believe him. God wants to make you free, and he wants to use your broken story. And actually, the very thing that you probably don't want to share is the very thing he's going to use. Sometimes that's how he works. Exactly. Yeah. G is give praise to God even as your heart breaks. I think it's really hard to praise the Lord in the middle of a storm. To say, what can I be grateful for? What can I be thankful for? And so I was surprised. There was a story I share in this chapter called The Gift of a Day. It was with my friend who was it was the very end of her life. And I got this gift of a day at her house. And it wasn't a huge thing to be thankful for. Like God, I mean, yes, it was a gift of a day, but it wasn't like this aha moment, like she was healed. But in the middle of the storm, I got this precious moment of time with her where we just sit and talked. And sadly, I helped her plan her service. We listened to songs, we weep together, we cried, we talked about our kids, we talked about, I honestly get teared up every time I think of this moment in time because it was a gift of a day. But you know what? If I could easily just say, God, I have nothing to be thankful for, but I can stop and say, you know what? I'm going to be thankful for that day. It was a gift in the middle of the pain. It wasn't still what I would have hoped. I would have hoped she'd be healed, but that wasn't what you did, God. So I'm going to be thankful for that little gift. Maybe it's a gift of an encouraging word from a friend or the gift of, there's our gifts in the middle of the storm. We can find them. We have to seek them, but we can praise God even in the whole world falling apart around us, So that is something that there's a song called Praise You in the Storm by Casting Crowns, and I would just put it on repeat. And I'm telling you, it's just, if you can lift your hands in the middle of the heartbreak and say, God, I don't understand why you're here, but I still praise you. Oh, Anel, there's something powerful about that. And it's going to change you on the inside. It's not going to change your external circumstances, but it'll change you internally. The T is trust God is good when your mind is doubting and you don't understand. Oh, so many why questions. And I don't even know if we always will understand this side of heaven. I don't know why my friend, God didn't heal her. I mean, I sit there and I go, God, she was a believer and people knew this was happening. If you had healed her, like think about all the people that would have been pointed to you, but that wasn't his plan. And I have to trust that there is something he's still doing, even when I don't understand. That's hard. And that's when Joseph's life in the Bible, I feel like he modeled this so well. So I have a whole chapter on him. So I'll let the people read it when they get the book, because I could talk forever about Joseph and Ellen. I don't want to spend too much time on him, but he has so much truth to teach us. And then the H is honestly share your story and help another hurting heart. And this is where I believe it comes full circle, where God says, you walk through this, not to just keep it to yourself, to help someone else. And I picture it like a bridge. So sometimes we're the one on the bridge and someone comes back to us and says, let me help you across. I also walk through that. And then sometimes we're the one that turn around and there's another person that has a miscarriage. I remember a couple years right after my miscarriage, another woman walked through the same thing. I was able to come across the bridge and just say, I'm going to help you. I didn't share anything with her except how God was faithful to me. Just anything about my story that I felt like maybe would be helpful to her, but it wasn't these big epiphanies at the time. It was just these small little details, but they helped her. And so I think that's the way God can take our brokenness and use it. So anyways, that's the acrostic for the book.
Yeah, that's beautiful. you had me in tears there, and
Oh,
a few of them, especially you know, the ones where you trust in God in the middle of the storm. That one's really hard because you know, you're seeing you all you see at that moment is your surrounding, right? Your circumstances or circumstance that's around you at that moment, and sometimes you don't see how you can trust God, you know,
hmm.
but it's a lot harder to do it than to just say, oh, trust God. But yeah, especially if you're dealing with, you know, someone's health or just a really, really hard experience that you're going through.
Yeah, I'm so glad you pointed that out now because there's two T's in strength. And when I was this acrostic was coming into my mind, again, I believe God dropped it in there. I was like, well, trust God isn't the first T. That can't be the second thing we do. Yes, we can start and say, God, I want to trust you. Help me get to there. But I don't think that's like the second thing. I feel like you got to grieve. You got to tearfully allow yourself to feel the emotions, take time to grieve. But I think as you work through that, as God starts to kind of help you through it, then the trusting starts to happen. And honestly, I just remember just saying, God, I don't want this to make me bitter. I want this to make me better. So I have to trust you through it. I don't understand still. So just help me with the not understanding and the doubts. But saying I want to be at a place where I trust, I think that's really important. The trust isn't always right away. And I don't want someone to listen right now and think, well, I'm not there yet. It's okay.
Yeah.
You can get there. God will help you get there, but just don't turn your back on him and completely walk away. I tell you, he is patient. He will take your doubts. He will take your anger. He can handle, like you said, he's a big boy. He can handle all of it. He wants to walk through it with you, but the trust is not always immediate. And I'm glad you pointed that out. So that's why I love that this word has two T's. It was just brilliant how that T became the second one.
And I think it goes back to feeling shame about being angry at God. Because I remember the situation where I was angry at God. I felt like shameful because how can I be angry at God? You know, God's my creator, and um, you know, He's always blessed me, and you know, all this stuff. So I felt shame. But I think us talking about sharing about these vulnerable situations, and where like, hey, you know, like it's okay to feel all the feels, and God can take it.
Yeah, he totally can. And again, it's okay to have those emotions. You just don't want to get stuck in them. I think that's
Right.
where we say to people like, "Oh, you should never feel that." Oh, that is not even a nice thing to say to someone because they do feel it. So then they're now feeling shame because, "Oh, I feel this and I'm not supposed to feel this." You are. God made you with emotion. He has emotion.
Yeah.
But don't get stuck in the anger and but yeah, you are going to be angry because this isn't how you hoped your life would look, and this was someone you loved and you didn't want them to die. I think about my friend. It was like, God, I don't understand, but I didn't let myself stay stuck there. I let myself feel it. I let myself journal. And I think that's one of the things I loved about journaling. Personally, this is what I did is I would write it all out, like everything I was feeling, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then I would end it with help me, and whatever that would help me not get stuck here. Help me to have strength to see that you're somehow in this. Help me. I'd end it with some way I'm inviting God into it to help me. I wouldn't just end it with, that's how I want to say. I'm like really ticked and there we go. It's like I would end it with a prayer or a verse, God, you are my refuge and strength. So I'm going to cling to that today, even though I don't really feel it. Or God, I know you can give me the strength to get through today and help my kids through the grief. I'm grieving, they're grieving. I don't really know how that's going to happen, but I know you're faithful. So I'm going to just cling to that. It's being honest, but also just being honest with the end thing. Like, God, I don't really feel that yet, but I'm asking you to help me. He will show up. He is so faithful, but it's okay for the honesty. It's actually not just okay. It is the right thing to do to be honest. Because if you just sit there and say, I'm okay, I don't feel any negativity, I don't feel any anger, that's not real. That's not true. And you're not going to get through the emotions. You're going to get stuck because you're just not really feeling them. You're kind of sugarcoating them, which is not really what, no one feels that way after something hard. There are the hard feelings. So let yourself feel them. Yeah. Such a
And
good point.
yeah, and just to remember that God already knows how you feel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, you know, it's up to us to speak it out. And I think the part about us speaking it out and showing, or not well, I guess showing, but like expressing it to God. I think that's part of the also the healing process.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. And it's going to deepen your roots, you guys. It's again, it's about this word depth. It's going to deepen your faith. It's going to deepen your roots and you're going to grow. You're going to heal first, which is what you want. But then as you're healing, I think I didn't realize that. And now I thought I was just healing. But at the same time, simultaneously, I was growing because you can't keep putting truth into yourself and not have it change who you are, you know? So as I was reading these books and just that was helping me heal, but then it was helping me grow my faith deeper. And that's why I say, what if your greatest heartbreak catapults you to your greatest growth? Because I believe it can and it will. And that's why the book's called Depth.
um, what did you learn about yourself through the writing process? So you mentioned a lot of like journaling, things like that, which are, you know, self-care in a sense, because you're not just feeling, you're not feeling, but like you're not getting stuck with your emotions, but you're letting them out and letting yourself go through the process. But what did you learn through the whole process of writing this book um that you had to relive your painful experiences?
Yeah. You know what? It was a 5-year journey. So I first of all want to say this wasn't like an overnight thing. So God gave me the idea for the book in 2017. And I started writing in 2018. And what I learned is that when we partner with God, He could do anything because I'm not a writer. I was not a writer. So I think that in 2014, He started having me write. And oh my gosh, Chanel, if you go back and read some of that stuff, it's really bad because in 2014, it was just honest, raw emotion, just lots of exclamation points. I was an exclamation point, love to put them at the end of each sentence. And it's just hilarious to go back and read it. But you know what I realized is God was having me capture what I was feeling for all those beginning years. And then in 2018, when I had to write the book, I went back and read those posts and I could get right back into that emotion again. So I had no idea at the time that I was like capturing how I was feeling and like little memories and things that would like, oh yeah, that's what happened. And I didn't even know. So I believe God had a plan again, beyond what I could understand with just even my initial blogging. But what I saw is He was growing my craft of writing. I joined different writing groups, Hope Writers, Compel with Proverbs 31. I worked with a writing coach. Again, this wasn't a skill set I thought I had a lot into. So I've asked God to give me tools, you know, and these were some of the tools. But I realized when we partner with God, when He gives us the idea, when we feel called to write the book, then He's going to equip us. And I felt like it was just a moment of time where I remember sitting at the computer and I would wake up before my kids. My power hours to write were like 5 a.m, sometimes as early as 4, because I kind of would get up and my brain would just be swirling with thoughts. And then, but a lot of times like 5 to 7, 5 to 9, summertime was like 5 to 9 or 10, the kids would finally wake up. And I just remember sitting there and being in awe after like, what just happened? Like I would just sit down and start typing. And it was like this moment that, again, it was like, I believe the Holy Spirit was just coming up over me and getting out these words that I'd go back and read it and think I wasn't capable of writing this, you know? So I just think if you, when God asks you to do something, don't pull back in fear. He will equip you, partner with Him. He will, even the podcast, I was like, I'm not techie. How in the world am I going to do this? And it was a hard yes for me because I felt like, yeah, I have a lot to say about books, but I don't know how to do all the tech stuff. And how do you start a podcast? You know, but I felt like God's saying to do it. And you know what? He partnered with me. You Google it. How do you start a podcast? Get a microphone. Okay. Bought the microphone, you know, download this software. And the next thing you know, you learn. And God's going to give you that. So I think would be my biggest lesson is partnering with God. He can do things in you, through you that you didn't think you could do. And actually, He doesn't want you to be able to do it in your own strength. He actually wants you to depend on Him. That's part of the lesson.
Yeah, and then He'll also put the right people
Yes.
in front of you that you
Yes,
probably
I
wouldn't
agree.
have met, that you probably wouldn't have met if, you know, if this is not what God's calling you to do. So sometimes those signs we need to be um what's it called, like open minded about too.
Yes, open mind. And then realize that it will stretch your faith, but that's a good thing. You
Yeah.
don't want to stay in the same place you were a year ago. You want to be growing and stretching. So, yes, partnering with God, He can do anything. So, if someone's listening right now and they're feeling a nudge, oh, don't disregard that. He's up to something big.
Yeah. And in my experience, I don't think it stops until you take action.
Yes, He just keeps reminding you of it.
Yeah, it's either that, like you have that nudge and that doesn't go away, or at some point, like maybe God goes and uses someone else because you just don't want to do it, and then you have regret later. So it's better
Yeah.
to just listen to God and not have that regret later in life.
Yeah. And if you're feeling ill equipped, that's probably the best place you can be because that means you're going to depend on God for his strength. So just know that's okay. We all have been there.
Still going through it.
Still there. Still
Yeah.
there.
Because
Yes. That's so true.
you never finish learning. You're always learning something new, right? And if it's podcasting or writing a book, maybe, yeah, you wrote this book, but maybe God's calling you to keep writing books, and it's a different experience every time. And I can imagine it's
Yes.
a different learning experience every time.
I would say that's so true. Yeah. And you know what? If you ever think you've arrived, that's a bad place to be, friends, because you know what? No one ever arrives. You always are growing. You're never going to be perfect. I used to want to be perfect. I think that was a struggle for me, perfectionism. But now I say, I don't want to be perfect. I want to be growing. So every year I want to be able to look back and say, have I grown more than the year before? Then that means I'm making progress. It's not perfect. There'll be days I have setbacks. There'll be days that I struggle, but that's okay because in the long run, am I on the path to keep trying to grow?
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so I always ask my guests this, but do you have a Bible verse, a song, a poem, or a word or a quote that keeps you going on those days that you just feel like giving up?
Okay, so it's so funny because it's like, oh, I have to just pick one because I'm like, I have a Bible verse, I have a song, so maybe I could share more than one if you're okay. Now I'm kind of
Okay,
have a
yeah.
hard time narrowing down. So there's a song called "Blessings" by Laura Story, and her book "When God Doesn't Fix It" was one of the books I read along my trajectory back in 2015, about a year after my divorce. And the song is all about what if you're again, what if those things that happen to you, those hard things, are really blessings in disguise? And I
Mhm.
don't know if you've heard the song. Have you heard it before? I
Blessings?
can't sing, but it goes like, what if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears?
No, but I'm gonna have to look it up.
Oh, okay. So it's called Blessings by Laura Story. First of all, get ready with the tissues because it's beautiful. It's that beautiful that it makes you cry, but in a beautiful way because her story is completely different than my story. Her husband had a brain, I forget what it was, but he ended up having a surgery for something wrong. And then he ended up having short-term memory loss. And again, completely different circumstance. I mean, I didn't even have a husband, right? I'm going through a divorce, but the truth's in her book. But the song was what she wrote in the middle of all that time. And oh, I mean, I must have played that song on repeat. That song, along with the Casting Crowns, Praise You in This Storm. I think those were the two. If I was having a hard day, I would put it on repeat. And you know what? I would sing the Praise You in the Storm song with them until I was just crying, just sobbing through it because I would be like, okay, God, I can lift up my hands and praise you in this. So those two I would say are good. I'm getting choked up just singing about it. Okay. Then one of my favorite verses is Psalms 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And I want you to know that in the middle of your heartbreak, he is close. Don't ever think you're alone. He is right there. Just call out, God, I need you. There's a couple stories in the book that I share of when I felt more alone than ever. And I just remember a devotional or something just reminding me of God's nearness. And I think that verse is one that just speak it and say, God, I don't feel you near. Can you help me feel your closeness? And ask him. I just think it's a beautiful verse and it's one that's easy to remember. There's a second part to it, like it saves those that are crushed in spirit. But I just love that first part. And I just kind of help me stay grounded because you are going to have times where you're feeling brokenhearted. Even again, years later, there's things that are happening now in my life that are bringing more heartbreak. I mean, I hate to say it, you guys, it's not a one time thing. You know,
Yeah.
I did share my three that I'd walked through, but now there's more. And so that is a verse that I regularly will say and invite God and ask him to come close to me. Or not come close to me, but help me feel his closeness. I already feel he's close, but let me feel it. And then a quote that I say in the book that I really want someone to think about is I shouldn't say what if, let me just say the hardest time in your life will become the most growing time in your faith. So if you can just think about that, that doesn't mean that it's easy. So let me rephrase that. Like, I don't want you to think, oh, that means it's easy. No, it's really hard. But just know God's not wasting it. So if you can remind yourself that he's going to take these broken pieces and use them and that this will grow you. that's another one that I cling to when things are hard. Like I remind myself that God's never going to just waste these tears. Every tear he uses, every pain and heartbreak he can use. So those are the things I would say to someone.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. With the last one you said, I'm sorry, was
The
the
hardest time in your faith.
quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were saying that, it just took me back to my personal time. And it always, like when I hear things like that, it takes me exactly to the moment where I felt that, pain and anger and all that. But now that I look back, like I knew God was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the gift of hindsight, right? We can go farther along in our journey and look back, but we're in the middle of it. I think I would just say to someone, just know he will use it. Like he is working. Don't, even though you can't see it, he is working. There's that Waymaker song. Again, I can't sing, so I'm not going to try to sing any of the lyrics. So I'll just say it. But it says, even when I can't feel it, you're working. Even when I can't see it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. And when I sing that song, I almost brings me to tears because that is true. That is true, friend. If you are in pain right now, God is working. You can't see it. Maybe someday you will in the future. Maybe you don't. I don't want to say you always will see. I'm still don't really know why God took my friend. Yes, I see some things that I see with her kids and the growth that they have, but I also still see a lot of heartbreak. So I don't know. I have seen how he's taken the pain that I walked through and used it, but I still don't always. So I don't want to give anyone like you're going to see it the next year, but he is still working and he is going to take those broken pieces of your life and he is going to use them in a powerful way if you allow him. And just know that it's not wasted.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I just wanted to add that yeah, you might not see it and you might never understand why you went through that, but I think it also just goes back to how do you want to use that pain
Mm-hmm.
for good or for bad,
Yeah.
for good in growing yourself and helping others.
Yeah. And sometimes that it's just for your own trajectory. Maybe God's growing you and it's not about a ministry outside or a person you're helping. It's just he's saying, I'm going to develop your character. But sometimes it's more, So I don't want to ever try to I know when someone's hurting, they're thinking, okay, I'm going to be able to see that. And sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. So I just wanted to clarify that. But he's still working, you guys, even if we don't see it.
I think sometimes too it's to grow our dependency on God
So
and,
true.
and get rid of the distractions, and if he strips you of not necessarily him, but he's allowing these situations to happen, right, to strip you out of um friends or family or a job or whatever those distractions were, and just have your focus on him. Sometimes that's just all he wants, for you to depend on him.
Yes. Yeah. Because you know what? In our good times of life, so many times we don't depend on him because we can do it in our own strength. And so it kind of takes being the rug pulled out from under us and the world turning upside down. And then you're like, oh, I can't do this by myself now. And that dependence on God is a beautiful gift. It's one of the blessings that comes through the hard times. I call it the bless in the mess. There are some blesses in the middle of the mess. Again, not trying to say it's easy. So I don't want anyone to leave here thinking, oh, it's not easy. It was years of counseling, years of tears, years of crying. But I hope and I pray that this book that I wrote would help someone else, because books were a huge part of my trajectory. They were a huge part of my healing and growing. And so I hope that this book someday becomes some part of someone else's story.
So talking about your book, where can we find your book? Where can we find you? Where can we find your podcast? All of that, so we can find you as a resource for anyone's going through pain and want to know more about your story, more about your book, or buy your book.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have a website called jodirosser.com. So that's JODIROSSER. And everything is there. You can link to everything there. So the podcast has a link. The book has a link. It's sold on Amazon. It's sold in all the, christianbooks.com, barnesandnoble.com. So anyways, there's a link that will get you to wherever. I don't know where people like to get their books, if they're Amazon people or if they're, but there's a link to all the different places. And you know what? My podcast is on all the places, Apple, Spotify. But again, that Jodi Rosser will get you to the link. But again, you're looking for a tree with deep roots, you guys. That's the cover of the book and the podcast cover art. It's the big tree with the deep roots. Oh, and there's the cover of the book, and Nell's holding it up. Yeah.
So watching it on YouTube, you can see the book.
Oh, I love it. There's that tree with the deep roots. I'm really proud of the cover. I feel like the designer really did a great job showing what I was hoping for it with the tree with the deep roots. So that's there. I am on Instagram at jodi.rosser. I'm also on Facebook at the same. I just started TikTok, but I forget what my handle is there. But you know what? I think if I'm sure I can find a link. I can send you one you can add to the show notes. But and then I'm on Pinterest too. But I think the main thing is my website will take you to any of those places. They're all there to link. But yeah, I would. And you know what? I do a blog each week, and I have other people come on and share their heartbreak to strength story. I have a series called My Heartbreak to Strength Story. And so maybe you're sitting there right now and you're like, none of those heartbreaks are the 3 I walk through. But maybe there's something else, and maybe someone else wrote for me that had that same thing and that would speak to you. I hope that this book will help anyone through any heartbreak. It doesn't have to be any of the 3 I walked through. This is just my story. Just like Laura's book, her husband had that whole different thing and it was a different heartbreak, but the truths in her book resonated with what I was walking through, just how God was faithful and things like that. And so that's what I'm hoping for with mine. Again, lots of resources. I have a free resource library too, where I have things like 10 things to help, 10 of my favorite Bible verses to help you when you're walking through grief, 10 things to do when the holidays, I know holidays are coming up and it's hard. Holidays are super hard. Grief is intensified. So I have 10 steps to help you through your grief at the holidays. So I try to come alongside and help because I know it's not easy and I want to be there. And I love to pray for you. So feel free to message me on any of the places and I would love to be praying for you.
Thank you, Jodi. And I'll have all the links in the show notes. So check that for all her links. And so thank you, Jodi, for just being brave, first of all, and sharing your, these experiences in your book, and also on your podcast, and just sharing them with others, in hopes that, they will help them. I know it's helped me since I listened to you at the MOPS meeting. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being brave.
Wow. Thank you so much. You're going to make me cry, Annelle. Thank you so much for your sweet words. It really means a lot to me. I'm glad we connected at the MOPS event.
Yes, me too. So do you want to say anything before we go?
Well, let me just say one thing to the woman sitting out there that's hurting. I know it's just like the world got turned upside down and you're just like, God, I don't know what to do. But I just pray right now that you will just seek him. Just say, God, please invite him to the plan. Please help me. Just give me strength. And I also pray that you will just see that God is going to be there walking through every step of it with you, but he's not going to waste it. And that he's got a perspective and a purpose beyond what we can understand. And so I'll just be praying for you and just know I'm here with you as the pain is there.
Yeah. And I just want to add, if you are going through something painful, please, 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 please do not think that you're alone. Reach out to me, or reach out to friends or family, or if you don't have anyone, maybe your local church, just reach out to somebody, find community. Please don't go through this alone, whatever you're going through.
Yes, that's beautiful. I concur.
Well, thank you so much, Jodi.
Thank you so much, Annelle. It was a pleasure. Thank you again for having me on your podcast.
And I will see you ladies in the next podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode inspired you. If you like this podcast, please share on social media and tag me on Instagram @TheBraveandHer. I would love to hear your stories of bravery.